Here is part 5 of Godless Panther's Satanic Panic series. We have now come to my favorite part of the Satanism scare. That crafty devil had pulled one over on much of the American public, but there were those who could spot Satan's sneaky shenanigans a mile away, and they did not sit back and let the young minds of good Christian Americans be poisoned by the evil sounds called rock and roll. Before we get into the Satanic Panic era, I will provide some background information to show the evolution of the anti-rock and roll holy rollers. Opposition to the musical style began almost instantly after it started getting airplay. In 1954, when Bill Haley's Rock Around the Clock was released, the God-fearing good old boys launched their mission from the Almighty to turn that clock backwards. The first people to vocally denounce rock music were members of racist groups such as the White Citizens Council of Alabama. The name alone would give Dracula the creeps. In April of 1956, Asa Carter of the aforementioned Gang of Thugs stated that bebop, rock and roll, and all Negro music are designed to force Negro culture on the South. The hostility toward rock and roll was intense. It was an avenue for narrow-minded, hateful zealots to express their inane bigotry. They considered rock to be a vehicle toward racial integration, an expression of overt sexuality. They thought the young people of America would listen to this music and it would have a profound effect on society, changing the way that people think and behave, making permissible, even acceptable, so many things that the members of the White Citizen Council considered to be immoral and indecent. As it turned out, those motherfuckers was right. Racists and puritanical nutballs gained political power in their crusade against the new music by appealing to the concerns of the parents of teenagers. Rock and roll was said to be a major cause for juvenile delinquency, and the music was dirty, obscene, a moral outrage. Concerts were banned in several cities across the country. Disc jockeys of many radio stations assured their listeners that they would not play any of that filthy music, and some stores refused to carry the records. They almost managed to kill rock and roll. But in the early 60s, something was happening. In the tradition of Woody Guthrie, folk musicians were coming out with strong political messages. In Detroit, Berry Gordy founded Motown Records, and a new distinctively American sound was born. And from England, the Beatles launched another new sound with an unprecedented popularity. Rock and roll came back, with the volume turned up to 11. The Beatles were a prime target for the crusade against popular music. Enter David Nobel. David was sure that popular folk, rock, and jazz music was an evil device cooked up by those crafty commies in the Soviet Union. In 1965, he wrote a 26-page booklet that was put out by a Christian Crusade publication of Tulsa, Oklahoma. In this document, Nobel provides us with indispensable wisdom, such as the communists, through their scientists, educators, and entertainers, have contrived an elaborate calculating and scientific technique directed at rendering a generation of American youth useless through nerve-jamming mental deterioration and retardation. The plan involves conditioned reflexes, hypnotism, and certain kinds of music. The results, destined to destroy our nation, are precise and exacting. Little wonder the Kremlin maintains it will not raise the red flag over America. The Americans will raise it themselves. If the following scientific program, destined to make our children mentally sick, is not exposed, mentally degenerated Americans will indeed raise the communist flag over their own nation. And in reference to the Beatles specifically, also, we are told teenagers bite their lips until they bleed. They even get overexcited and take off their clothes. To understand what rock and roll in general and the Beatles in particular are doing to our teenagers, it is necessary to return to Pavlov's laboratory. The Beatles' ability to make teenagers take off their clothes and riot is laboratory tested and approved. It is scientifically labeled mass hypnosis and artificial neurosis. You gotta love this guy's style. We are told, therefore Pavlov, therefore laboratory tested and approved. In 1966, Nobel provided the public with his first novel, called Rhythm, Riots, and Revolution. Evidence suggests that the tome is out of print and rare. Amazon lists one used paperback copy for a whopping $157. There is one customer review. The customer describes the rare gem as being the written equivalent of a combo of Reefer Madness and Plan 9 from Outer Space. Then David decided to get hep with the jive, and he released a platter. In 1968, Christian Crusade Recordings released The Marxist Minstrels, the Communist Subversion of American Folk Music. So, put on your boogie shoes. Here's a
They mention the fact that Joan Baez contends her favorite folk singer is Phil Ochs. That's spelled O-C-H-S. The other day when we were in Scranton, Pennsylvania, I picked up two albums by Phil Ochs, both printed and both disced by Elektra. One is entitled I Ain't Marching Anymore. And on the back we're told, now listen to this. This is how they introduce the record, or the song on the record. This borders, that is the song I Ain't Marching Anymore, this borders between pacifism and treason, combining the best qualities of both. And he's also the author of Draft Dodger Rag. But on the other album that I picked up, entitled Phil Ochs in Concert, on the back of the album we have a group of poems set out. And after one reads the poems, one asks himself, who wrote these poems? And lo and behold, the poems are actually written by Mao Zedong. And Phil Ochs makes the closing comment, is this the enemy? On this album you will find such greats as Ringing of the Revolution, Cops of the World, Canons of Christianity, and others. This is Phil Ochs.
David Newbill is still around, and apparently he's still not taking his meds. He wrote a few more anti-rock books. Some are still in print, including The Marxist Minstrels in book form. Newbill is a relevant crackpot to discuss in this series because he set the groundwork for many other mentally unbalanced enemies of popular music. Specifically, Newbill was a major influence on a much more well-known lunatic and author of anti-rock and roll books. That would be Bob Larson. Larson diverted from Newbill in that he did not focus on communism being the origin of rock and roll. Bob, or is it Boob, Larson pointed the finger at another red villain. Guess who that might be? It's now time to go to part 6.